Okay, so write a function whose is special that takes an array of pets and returns a string confirming what you already know. All of the pets are very special. Oh, okay. So they give you, do they give you? No. Okay, so you put in an array. So I will just copy and paste this here. Just the. So this is just going to be an array of special pets. So basically, we're going to write, and it's going to return a string. Yeah. So basically, we're going to have to loop through this function, and we're going to return one string, right? Sadie, the cat, is very special. So loop through this array of objects, and you have to like get one string as an output, right? So let's go ahead and write this function. So const whose special equals, and it takes an array. Okay, so we know that if we're looping through an array of objects and we want to output a string, it sounds like we're going to be wanting to be adding things to the end of the string, right? So right away, I know like we could just say like let result equal empty string, and we're just going to keep looping through and putting things in here. Okay. So the key point in this problem is to know like when to put a space and when not to put a space, right? So you can do, I mean, I'm pretty sure you could just do like a for loop if you wanted to, but let's use something that you guys learned yesterday, for each. So we could do, well, this will be like pets, right? So this will be pets.forEach. And for each takes a function, right? It takes a callback, okay? So this callback, and you see how I made this function an arrow function? You can also make an arrow function in here, like that. Instead of writing function yada yada yada, you know? So you can write that as well. But I will do it this way. So function, and this function is going to take two things. For each defines these two things as the current element, so we could do like current pet, and the index. I'll just put I, right? That's what for each supplies for you, okay? So now we can just do, right away, now that we're at like the first index right here, right away, we can just add the pet, current pet, dot name plus a string space the space plus what is it? Pet species, pet dot species plus a string with a space is very special. Okay? So now, what's up? Oh, current pet, that's my bad. Okay, so now when for each takes us through the array, the first thing it's going to do is going to look at this object. This is the current element, the current pet, and it's going to say current pet dot name plus the, so current pet dot name is Sadie plus space the space cat plus space is very special. Does everyone understand how that will get that? Is anyone confused by this? Right? You have the object and you just like take all the things. You know it's dot name, you know it's dot species, so you take the things and put them into a string that we will be like concatenating onto. Yeah.
On the truth, the truth plus
Oh, result, sorry.
Okay, I was making
My bad. So, yeah, so the result is an empty string. So during the first thing we're going to do is just put this new string into there.
that's what the plus represents.
That's what this represents, the plus equals. We're going to say result is equal to whatever result was plus this thing. And this thing is one long string, right? The name, Sadie, plus the space, plus this, plus that. Cool? That's step one. Now the second step, what happens if there's, that's cool for if there's one thing in the array, but what happens if there's more than one thing? You want a space in between the pet's name and this exclamation point with each sentence, right? But you don't want the space in the beginning, and you don't want the space of in front of the name in the beginning of the sentence, and you don't want the space after the exclamation point at the end of the sentence. So, what do we do? What do we do indeed? We can make an if statement, right? And we could say, if I, this is where the index comes in, if I is less than, what did I call this? Pets dot length minus 1. Then we can do results plus equals a space. So what we're saying is we're going to put this sentence into that, right? Then we're going to check where we are in the array. We're going to check the index. And this will always be true unless the index is at the last character, right? Pets.length minus 1, in this case, will be 2, right? There's 3 things in the array, so the length minus 1 is 2. Special pets at index 2 gives us this. So when we're at 2, when I is 2 and we're here, this is no longer true. So when we're at the end, this space will not be added on to the end of the sentence. Otherwise, every time before that, we're going to add this long sentence there, and then we're just going to put a space. Right? So, at the end, we return result. Oh, did I do something weird? My bad. Oop. Okay. So then if we do who's special of special pets, we get what we wanted to. And you can see the quotes. There's no space in the beginning. There's a space here. There's a space here. And there's no space here. Is any? Yeah.
Is it wrong to just use slice?
Slice where?
Well, when you have the whole string space, so add the space in the first definition. So,
Where, here?
no, sorry, the second.
Here?
Yeah, line 8.
So add the space where?
At the end,
Here?
and then slice the string.
You could do this. No, but you can do this every single time, right? Just add this every single time. And then we can just results equals results dot slice from 0 to results dot length minus 1. And it gives us the same thing. You could do that too. See, there's many different ways that you could do this. You have all of these different kinds of methods. It's just whatever is your personal preference, what you could do. I didn't have to do this whole plus nonsense. I could do the backticks with the interpolated string thing, with the $, curly braces if I wanted to. But whatever, it's fine. The slice thing works too. Whatever you guys want. Does anyone have any questions though? Nothing. Does anyone want me to do another question? What's up? Okay, let me just see what that is. My for each? Oh, okay. So this is just... Okay, cool. 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6. So my for each. Let's do it. Copy this out. So we will do... So right away, when you hear my for each, you know that for each is an array method, right? So you dot off of an array and you do for each. But since we're recreating that functionality, we know that the first thing has to be an array because you're not dotting off anything anymore. So the first thing will be array. And the second thing will be a callback. So what do we do? So basically, for each is going to loop through the entire thing, right? It's going to loop through the whole array and call a function on each of those elements, right? Usually, when you use the for each method, you define what you're doing, like what the function is right there inside of it, or you can pass another function into it there. But here, what my for each actually only cares, it doesn't really care what this callback is. It doesn't really care. It just knows that it has to call this on every element. But it has to pass it two different things. It has to pass it the current element, and it has to pass it the current index. So let's write a for loop. Because a for loop will loop through an array, and you'll have access to the current element, and you'll also have access to the current index, right? So we could just do for let I equals 0, right? I is less than array.length, and then I plus plus. So we can just call the callback with array at I, and then also I. That's it. Do you know why that's it? Because for each doesn't return anything. For each just takes another function, goes through an array, and calls that function with everything. But it passes that function automatically the current element at that array and the current index. So this is all we're doing here. We're just writing a for loop from scratch. We're looping through the array, and then we take the callback that was passed to my for each, or for each, right? And then you just invoke it. You just call that, but the things you're passing into that function, the things you're invoking it with, will be array at I, the current element in the array, and you'll also throw in the index. And then you return nothing because for each returns nothing. Does anyone have any questions on why this works? Yeah. Can you say that again? Oh, do you want me to test it? Or... So, yeah, sure. So we could say, like, let test array will be equal to array 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And then we'll write a function here, and this function takes an element and an index, right? So we could say if index is equal to 1, if it's not equal to 1, So everything besides the second thing in the array, L plus equals L plus plus. That's what the function is going to do. It's just going to add 1 to everything in the array, except the second thing. So then we could do my for each pass it test array and pass it function adder. Then we could console.log test array. Oh, that didn't do anything. Whoa. Yeah, I thought it would. Oh, okay, never mind. So let's just like console. We could just like console.log here. Never mind, that wouldn't work. We could just console.log L. So here, 0. Wait, what? Array at I. Oh, I'm console logging I. Yeah, so here we're not logging out 2. It's just whatever. You know? This is correct. Like, sorry, I did that. But, yeah. It skips 1. It skips the first index because everyone understands what's happening, right? Like, this function will be passed into this. This is the callback. So you're going to call this function every time with every element. So the element at each time will be 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. But I will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So when I is 1, when we're at index 1, we're not going to do anything. Because this is only if we're not at index 1. Then you console log. So that's why we see 1, 3, 4, 5. Okay. How'd you guys feel about higher order functions in general? Just passing functions into functions. You guys like that? It's alright. Today, we're going to be talking about different things. Not really so much. It's the same concept, except it's a little different. So if we can pass a function into a function, because a function is just a value, right? If we can pass a function into a function, then we can also return functions from functions, right? Right? Functions just return values, right? And functions are values, so why can't you return a function? That's what we're going to be talking about today. So let's say we have a function here. Let me scroll up a little bit. Let's say we have a function here, right? This function will be called says hi, right? This function is just going to console log yo. And then we will have another function here that will say gets says hi. And it's just going to return the other function. Okay? So what do you think is going to happen when I do this? I say let what is this, and I'm going to set it equal to gets says hi invoked. When I console.log, the type of this variable, what is this? What do you think is going to be? What do you think is going to happen? Exactly. It's just going to be a function. What is this is now says hi. So if I do and invoke what is this, you get yo. Says hi is being called. It's just being stored in this variable now. What is this? Does this make sense? No? If we're returning an entire function, so when you call get says hi, the only thing we're returning is says hi, right? And says hi is a function. So we're returning the entire function. So when we're setting this variable, what is this, to the return value of get says hi, and it's the return value because you're invoking get says hi, right? If you were just doing this, you see the return statement is different because now that we're not invoking get says hi, this is the main difference here. Since we're not invoking get says hi, what is this is just this function. It's not what it's returning, it's just this function. So when we console log the type of what is this now, it's still a function, it's just this one, not this one. But when we invoke it, we don't get yo. We don't console.log yo. That's not happening. This function is not running. Okay? Instead, what we get is the return value says hi, and you can see that right here. That is the main difference of this and that. This, that. This gets us yo. Does everyone understand that? So if that's different here, then what would happen if I returned this? Instead of returning says hi, I return says hi invoked. What would happen then? Nonsense would happen then. You get mad errors because yo is being called, right? I mean, yo is being consoled, right? That's because says hi is being invoked right here. And says hi is being invoked when we assign it to what is this. But get says when you're assigning an invoked function to a variable, what is actually being assigned? It's going to be the return value, right? So what is get says hi returning? It's returning says hi invoked. That means that get says hi is actually returning whatever says hi is returning. And if you don't implicitly return something, like here we're just console.logging yo, that means that's undefined. That's why we see a type of undefined, and that's why we have a giant error. What is this is not a function. What is this is undefined. Does everyone get that? Who doesn't get that? Who's confused? Ask me a question. Talk. What do you mean? When it was okay? Like this? Well, I could look at that later. Does everyone have a question with the constant?
So if we change line 49 to a return value,
If we change not okay, cool.
49 to a return value,
Sure.
will that still be an error?
We still get an error because we're trying to invoke it. Right? like you see here, we're still, if everything stayed the same, but now we're just returning something, we're trying to invoke this, right? So let's run through that again. What happens? What is this is a random variable, right? And we're going to assign it to the return value of get says hi. Get says hi is returning says hi. Invoked. So get says hi is returning whatever says hi is returning. So that means when says hi is invoked, it runs to see what the return value is, right? It console.log something, cool, whatever. But then it returns a string here, right? So now what is this? Is this string? We console.log the type of what is this, and we get a string. And then we try to invoke that string. And then JavaScript says no. If this was just an anonymous function, then this happens. Because now the same logic, as we were going by the steps again, the same logic is true, whereas this is being invoked, so will be the return value of this, right? And that will be what is this. That will be this function. I mean, this variable, the value, right? And now it's returning an anonymous function with no name. And this is also valid, and you can also do this. But this function, it's not being run here, right? It's not this thing is not being invoked here when it's being returned. What we're returning is a function definition, right? Definition of an anonymous function. So now, what is this? Is this function. So when we console.log the type of this function, it's a function. And we run it, we get this is confusing. But first we get yeah, because this function had to run for that to happen. This is a way, by returning functions, I could write functions inside here, return them, and then set it to a variable out here, what is this? And then you could use it in the outer scope. Yeah.
If I look at the top function, you have console.log yo.
Yeah.
Right before this is confusing. But in the output, we have the word function in between.
So this is what's going on. This whole thing, right? This block of code are just function definitions. If I got rid of everything down here, nothing would happen. You just get undefined. The page runs, looks for something, nothing happens, it returns undefined. These are just, this is the same thing as saying like, let hello equal hello. It's just like, it doesn't matter. Okay, you're defining this to be this, but that's it, right? So then, down here is when something happens. First thing is that, okay, I just said let hello equal hello. I proved that does nothing, right? But now I'm saying let what is this is going to be equal to a function being invoked. So JavaScript is going to see that you're invoking that function, so it's going to call that function. And when it calls get says hi, it will return, what does get says hi return? It returns says hi invoked, right? So then JavaScript's going to be like, okay, well, what does this return, right? So it's going to call this function, and this will now run. So that's when we get the yo, and then it's just going to return that function. So if this happens, you get yo in the console, but nothing else is happening, right? Because you're just setting this to a variable. Is everything clear up until this point?
Yes.
So now that this is done running, and this has a value now, right? This function as its value. So we can continue with the code. That's when this gets console logged. Then you get the function. Then, after that's done running, we do this. We invoke, what is this? Says hi is not running. When this is invoked, when what is this is invoked, says hi does not run. this is the only function that is running. Because this is the return value of says hi, which gets passed up to what is this. And that's why we see this is confusing in the console.
Oh, okay.
Does that make more sense?
Yes.
This is still confusing. So,
You, on 59, you gave the variable, what is this, equals get says hi invoked.
yeah.
How is that, and then you, how is line 61 different than line 59? Because if you invoke what is this on 61, isn't that...
Wait, say that again? What's the difference between this line and this line?
Yeah, because you're invoking a variable that has get says hi invoked.
Yeah. So,
So why don't we just invoke what the variable is, equals, like, get says hi.
why don't I think I don't understand the question.
What is this equals get says hi invoked, right?
Yeah.
So why don't you just invoke get says hi instead of giving it a variable and then invoking the variable?
Because if you just invoke get says hi, so what is this no longer exists? Get says hi just returns this thing being invoked, right? The return value for get says hi is a function, right? Which says hi. Why is that undefined? Oh, maybe it's because. That's my. Yeah, sorry. So now, when you just call get says hi, this returns another function invoked, right? So we have to see what that is. We have to run this now. This console.logs yo, and then it just returns a function. But what are you gonna do now then? Like, okay, you return the function, but you're not capturing this anyway. This is now lost. You can't. The point to capture, the point to set this into a variable is now test is this inner function. So now we can call this outside of that function. We can call test out here. And again, you can pass stuff in. Yeah.
When you invoke get says hi, yo comes, right?
When you invoke get says hi, the first thing that happens.
How come the second part, the return function, doesn't run? Because isn't it all part of the same code block?
What do you mean the return function doesn't run? You
Like
mean-
it doesn't console.log this is confusing as
On this
well.
line.
Yeah.
Because, so it's looking, so you agree when this is invoked, this function's running. And you agree that when this function runs, the only thing that's happening is it's returning something, right? That something is a different function that is also invoked. So do you agree that now this function, wherever it is, has to run, and we have to try and find a return value from there, right? Cool. So then we go up here. What's the first line? The console.logs yo.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. Then it sees the return keyword and is like, okay, this is the thing we're returning. We're not running this function. We're returning a definition of a function. We're returning the whole function not being invoked. That's what's going on. So we return that entire function. So this function is actually the return value of this. So that gets put into test. Right? Now test is this whole function.
Did it say function after yo?
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Because then we were console logging the type of
It's returning the definition, but it's not invoking it. It's not running.
yeah.
It's just confusing because usually when you give a variable something, that variable is the same thing as
When you give what? What happened?
That,
Is it still confusing?
I got it. I just
Oh yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, for sure. Let me see if I'm missing something. So let's do this. So let's say that says hi is now going to say hi to somebody, right? So we'll do like let. Oh, sorry. So we'll let person will be me, right? Then we will say yo person here. Well, actually, no. This is now going to be like, wait, hold on. This won't be, this is going to say yo. This isn't going to say yo. This isn't going to do anything anymore. This is going to say yo, this inner function. But it's going to say yo, the name that's defined and says hi. Does everyone agree that name, person, is not defined inside of the function that's being returned? Does everyone agree? Cool. So, if I console log, what is this? Everything is still the same, right? So if I do this, oh shit, what happened? What is this? This gets us out. This is name is not defined. That's my bad. Forget that. Right? So if I do like person here, what do you think is going to happen now? If I do, what is this? What do you think is going to happen now? Just to be clear, we're going to call this here. We're going to say, what is this, is going to be invoked with person, with a string, my name, marker, right? What do you think will happen? Will we get yo Marco? Nah. You know why? Because, why?
You would vote against this high because you have it.
Where is get says hi? Where is person coming from originally? It's coming from get says hi. So, does everyone agree that what is this is just this function that's being returned, right? So if you pass in like a random parameter to a function, a random argument to a function that doesn't have a defined parameter, it's not going to do anything with that. You could do whatever you want. You could like throw a million things into this function. It's still just going to console.log yo. And then what is person? Person is being passed down from says hi. And says hi is being called with person here, which is actually being passed down from get says hi. So I can get this out, put it in here, and then we get yo. Do you guys want me to walk through this?
So if you put marker back in line 60, you would have to give the function parameter on line 45.
Yes. So let me just walk through and see why this works. So like, the first thing, it runs through, right? These are just definitions. It goes down here, and then it says, okay, so we're going to do another definition. What is this? And it's going to be equal to get says hi invoked. So things are about to happen, right? But get says hi is now being passed the string, which happens to be my name. And then we look at get says hi. Get says hi takes that. There's something here, right? So we capture this string into this variable person. So now we go down and it says return says hi, and we're going to throw whatever that was into this function. And that was Marco. So Marco goes to this person, and then you call says hi with Marco, right? Says hi now, this person up here is going to be Marco, right? Who's confused by that? Who doesn't know why person is Marco at this point? Everyone's good with this. So, person is Marco at this point, and it's returning a function that references that person. But this function isn't running. So how does it know when I call it down here that person is Marco? That is called closure. Okay? Closure is, let me read to you the real definition, just in case I don't get anything mixed up. So closure is the fact, that an inner function can still have access to values defined in an outer function, even after that outer function has finished running. Because when get says hi finishes running, it just returns this function, right? Does everyone agree? That hasn't changed for a while, right? This function is just being returned. So what is this? Is that function, right? So now says hi has stopped running. It's returned its value, and it's being put into what is this? So now we call what is this later. This function is being called console.log person. So it doesn't, I feel like it shouldn't make sense that that's allowed to happen, but since you passed it in up here, this will still have a reference to what that value was originally. Does that make a little sense? Like, the first time when we go through it to see what is this will be, right? We're throwing Marco through the chain. It's going down all of these functions. Then it's going to return an anonymous function, and that person is defined up here. And this is referencing what that is here, right? So even though that this function is not running, when you call it later, it will still have access to that. It will still have access to the person value. That's what closure is. It's just a fact. That's just what happens, okay? Even after says hi is done running to be assigned into what is this, it will still have access to this variable, which is not defined in here. Because when this function runs, it will look and say, it won't throw an undefined message, it will look up and say, okay, that existed at some point in time. Yeah.
So the closure has access to the variable later on, right? Is that what you're saying?
Closure is this inner function has access to variables defined in outer functions, even if the outer function has stopped running.
So why is it called closure? Because when I think of closure, it's like you get a sense of why something ended and then it's done. It's just done.
Well, the outer function's done.
But you still have access.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't answer that. But like this was the previous example without this.
Oh, okay.
The previous example
Okay.
this is also closure, right? This is also what closure is, because person is being defined in says hi. Then when you return this function, after that happens, after what is this is defined, says hi stops running. But when you console.log what is this, it still has access to what person was. Does everyone understand that says hi is stopped running after line 59? After this line, says hi is done. Right? Okay. All right. Any more questions before I go into the slides? The slides. Any questions at all? I'm just going to go over everything again. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. So higher order functions 2. So we're going to talk about returning functions from functions again. And we'll go into closure again. So returning values from functions, and we know that functions are can return values, right? Like this one returns a string, returns I am a string. You call it here and put it in here, right? That's what's happening. When you say let variable equals function invoked, that variable will be whatever the function is returning, right? So when you console.log return value, you get I'm string, because that's what's being returned. Is everyone okay with this? This might be confusing, maybe, a little bit, but like, it'll get stuck after a while, because you're going to be setting variables to return values all the time, so it's okay. But that's the fact. Call this function when you're actually assigning that variable. The function's actually running and looking for what the return value is, okay? So then, returning values from functions. In the previous unit, we learned that functions are like any other values. So functions can return values, and functions are values. Functions can return other functions. It's the same thing. So like here, function greetMe, function getGreeter. Oh, this is like the same thing. Okay. So function greetMe just console.log hi. Function getGreeter returns this function, right? So like greeter equal getGreeter invoked, it will return greetMe. So when you console.log the type of this variable, you get a function. When you console.log greeter, the entire thing, you get that weird bracket function colon what the name is, you know? And then when you invoke greeter, you get hi. Is this okay for everyone? All we did was write a function that console.logs hi, then wrote another function that returns that function. So the return value of getGreeter will be greetMe. Okay? All right. So, like I showed you, if we did invoke greetMe, if that did happen inside of the getGreeter function, if instead of returning just the function name not invoked, if we call it, then it's going to look for the return value of greetMe, and that's what getGreeter will return. And in this case, greetMe doesn't return anything. It just console logs something. Console.log does not return anything, okay? So that's why when this is running, that's why we see hi. The type of is undefined. You console log the thing, it is the value undefined, and then you can't run it. You can't call it. Because undefined isn't a function. Does anyone want me to go over why this is happening again? Walk through it again. I don't mind. Promise. Okay. greetMe is not returning anything. So returning functions from functions. So this works too. I didn't show you this, but like this works too. Instead of returning a function that was defined out here, you can define the function inside greetMe and then just return it like that. Well, I technically did show you something like this, except I was just returning this an anonymous function, right? But this is the same thing. You write a function inside of getGreeter called greetMe, and then you just return it like that. And then when you call greeter here, you get the hi. Because when you say getGreeter, when getGreeter is running, greetMe never runs, right? That's why you don't see hi twice. You're just returning an entire function, not invoked. Okay? So, and you set it to this variable variable greeter. And greeter will be greetMe, so you can invoke greeter now because greetMe is a function. And then when you invoke it, you call it, you just get console.log hi. So you get hi in the terminal. Print hi. Cool? Alright. So, and yeah, we could return anonymous functions too. Instead of putting the return statement down here, giving this a name, and returning that name, you could just return the function right here. You could even return arrow functions, you know? It's the same thing. Just no name functions. They don't need names. They're just doing something. You know what I mean? So now when you call greeter, it will be this. And it gets the same result. This is okay, right? It's not like it's not that weird or whatever. It kind of makes sense logically, right? Like if we're going to call this function here, we need a return value, and that will be what greeter is, right? This makes logical sense. But in this case, it's just going to be a function. So then greeter is a function. It's just what happens. And then you can call greeter wherever you want. And that's good. It's okay, right? So what if our return function takes a parameter? So, forget about closure, what we just talked about right now. Here, it's exactly the same thing as the previous slide, but now the anonymous function we're returning is going to have a parameter defined, and we will console.log hi, and then that parameter, name. So when we say let greeter and we want to assign that a value, get greeter invoked returns this function, right? So then greeter, you have to pass a name into it if you want to say hi whoever. That's why we get hi Mary, that's why we get hi Rosalind, and that's why we get hi undefined, because on line 12, we don't pass in anything. So name will be undefined. Remember, if you don't pass a variable into a function that expects one, then inside of the function, everywhere it's referenced, it's just going to be equals undefined. That's it. Does that make sense? Okay. So now we'll get into closure, okay? Closure is important. So let's talk about scope first, because they're kind of related. Before we talk about, let's review how scope works. So inner functions can access variables defined in outer functions, right? Does everyone agree with that? That's all scope. We did that like 2 weeks ago or something. If name is Mary here, and let says hi is defined here, and it's console logging name, and then you run says hi inside of this function, and you call greeter, you get hi Mary, right? So we're writing a function called greeter. First thing we're going to do inside greeter is define a variable name, and we're going to set it equal to Mary. Because of scope, if we try to console.log name outside of this function, you'd get it doesn't exist, right? But if you're saying let says hi equals to a function, so this is now going to be another variable and another function, and it's going to access something called name. It's not inside of the local function scope, so it's going to look one level up until it finds something, that's name. And boom, name is right here. So then when you call says hi here, invoke it, this function's going to run, and it's going to look for name. Name's there, so you get hi Mary. Right? This is just scope. This is just simple scope. It's just like, you know. Any questions? You sure? Because this is closely linked to how closure really works, you know? So it's the fact that an inner function can still have access to values defined in the outer function even after the function is finished running. It's the same thing up here, except imagine greeter already ran, right? And this function is the thing that's being returned. That's pretty much what closure is. So like, in this scenario, you have a function getGreeter, right? First line, we're just going to console log getGreeter's running. So when you see this message, you know that that function has been called. Next line, we're going to define another variable called name, and it's going to be Mary. Then we're going to console.log getGreeter is finishing. If this message happened after this whole return statement, that would never run. Because after a function returns something, that line, nothing else is going to run. So you put this console log right before the return thing, so you know that the next line will be the last line. So it's going to be done there, right? Then it returns this function, console.log hi name. Right? It's just returning an anonymous function, and it's going to say hi, it's going to say name. The name is defined out here. So when you say let greeter equals getGreeter invoked, getGreeter is now going to run. It's going to run. You get getGreeter is running, let name, then you get getGreeter is finishing, and then it returns this function into greeter. That all happened before the code, the compiler even got to line 14. Now, after that's all done, we get to line 14, and then now greeter is being invoked, and greeter is this. And you get hi Mary. Marie. Mary? Is that Mary or Marie?
Marie.
That's my bad. I've been saying Mary the whole time. Could be Mary, right? Maybe? I don't know. Whatever, doesn't matter. But like, you see now, when this is finished running, and it was assigned into greeter, it still has access to the name that was defined in this outer function. That's just what closure is, okay?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So line 13, let reader equal getGreeter invoked.
Yeah.
That's why you get getGreeter is running, getGreeter is finishing.
Because when you're invoking something,
But
you're
is it,
running the function,
but is
right?
it invoking? Because I thought, or sorry, is it being invoked? Because I thought on line 13 you're just simply assigning it to a variable.
You are assigning it to a variable.
And that I thought once
So-
you invoke the variable, then essentially get greeter.
Let me try and explain it again. So let greeter, right? You're saying you're declaring that there will be a variable called greeter, right? Let's assign it to something. That something is a function that is being invoked. When you open the parentheses at the end of a function, you call it, right?
Okay, like
So-
right then and there it's getting called.
Right then and there, it's getting
Simply
called.
because
Because of that, yeah.
okay, that was my only
100%.
question.
Even inside of this declaration, the function has to run.
That's
Because
what I was curious about. I was like, even
it has to run, because think about it. You can't like set a variable to a function running, right? Like, what else would happen? You know, like I don't know. Like, if you just invoke this. See, if you didn't invoke the function, then greeter just would be getGreeter. If you don't invoke it, it's just going to be the function, right? But if you call it, the function has to run. It has to have a value. You know, when you assign something, it has to have a value. You know. So it has to look for what the function is returning, because you know functions return value.
even when it's being set to a variable, it can be ran.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why I said before line 14 is even reached,
It's already.
you get all those constants, because this is already ran. And the reason why it has ran is because JavaScript is looking for a variable to assign to greeter. So it runs the function, because when you're running when you invoke the function, it's got to run, and it's going to see like, okay, what's this returning? Bam, return keyword, greeter is now that function. So that when greeter is invoked down here, this is the function that's running, the inner function. You could almost say that it's ignoring scope, but it's not. It's like a loophole. You know what I mean? Because now we can take this inner function that's defined inside of this function out and use it over here. But it will still have access to the variables that were defined inside of GetGreeter. That's what closure actually is. Okay? So I did this with you. If getGreeter took a parameter, when you're assigning the variable greeter, you're going to have to pass in something to getGreeter. Because if you didn't, if you passed nothing in here, right? Let's say you didn't pass in Rosalind, what would name be? It would be undefined. So then, when you return this function, it's referencing something that was never passed in. So that is just undefined, right? But if you do throw something into getGreeter, name is now Rosalind, so then this function is accessing that at that point in time, so name will always be Rosalind. Every time you run this function, every time you run greeter, it will always console log this. Unless you reassign it, calling getGreeter with a different string, with a different argument. Because in that point in time, when this was returned, name was Rosalind. Cool. What if both functions take a parameter? So, since getGreeter takes name1, let's pass Mary, whatever, into getGreeter, right? So now name1 is Marie. And then getGreeter is actually returning a function, but that function takes name2, right? But that's okay. Line 8 doesn't need to worry about that because it's calling getGreeter, okay? And when getGreeter is running, it just returns a function. It just returns a function definition, okay? So now greeter is this function. So you're going to also pass something to greeter, and that will be what name2 is. And when it was assigned to greeter in the first place, name1 was defined. It was Marie. So name1 will be Marie every time you call greeter. So hi Marie, meet Rosalind, right? So you can call greeter with 8 different names, and you'll just be introducing Marie to all these people. Does that make sense? All the rules are the same, right? Like, this function has access to name1 due to scope. That's allowed. And it also takes name2, right? So then you pretty much you're like setting name1 here, and then you're setting name2 here. And that's why there are no errors there. Because in this point of time, when it's defined, when you're passing name1 is Marie, so then if name1 is Marie here, name1 is Marie here. So then you return that function into greeter, where name1 would be Marie, and then Rosalind is name2, because you call this function with Rosalind. So name2 will be Rosalind. How's that? All right. Okay, here's another example. So we have this function getGreeter, takes name1, returns a function that takes in a parameter, that takes a argument, name2, find a parameter, whatever. Console.log hi name1 meet name2, right? So we can say let introduce Marie to getGreeter to Marie, and then let introduce Rosalind to getGreeter Rosalind, right? we're naming these variables these things because these here, name 1 will always be Marie and name 1 will always be Rosa. So when you call introduce Marie to Dorothy, introduce Marie to Albert, you get hi Marie, meet Dorothy. Hi Marie, meet Albert. This is just saying like, it's the same function as before, it's just saying that we can now rename these variables to something that makes a little more sense, and then when you call them down here with strings, it's going to be like you're introducing Marie to Dorothy, and that's what's going to happen. Does everyone understand? The logic behind the function is not changing. It's just the naming of the variables. Okay. So that's it. Talked about returning functions from functions. Talked about closure. Any questions? Before you guys take a break. So,
How does this compare and contrast to like helper functions? Or is that what this
well,
is?
no. See, higher order functions are like literally your it's a function that takes a function or a function that returns a function, right? So a helper function is just it's just like a function you write somewhere, right? That does a small little thing, and then you use it in other functions. You know, like usually when you're writing helper functions, you want that to do one specific thing that can be reused in different functions to help you solve problems. That's like the main purpose of a helper. So you guys know, tomorrow we're going to be learning recursion, okay? Recursion is not, it's like a pain in the ass. It's not, but like, we'll get through it together, okay? So make sure you watch the pre-reading, watch the pre-reading. Do that, okay? And yeah. So take like 5 minutes, then I'll slack out there as we'll start the workshop, okay? You all did good.